Hi everyone, I'm Steve Shapperly, one of the pastors of the Downtown Church. We are so honored and so excited to continue to partner in the gospel year in and year out with each of you, but especially during this Momentum series. We want to remind you during the series to continue to bring your field guide both to service and to community group. Feel free to make notes in there, mark it up, use it to stay engaged. It's a wonderful way to continue your engagement in this series. We'd like to thank each of you for your partnership and trying to hit our primary goal of having 100% engagement during this series. We'd like to have 100% of our folks at church thinking and praying about how to use the time, talent, and treasure the Lord has given them to serve the Lord and kingdom purposes. If you happen to miss any of the sermons during the series or just even miss the sermon for this week, you can check those out on the website at graceb3.org/sermons, or you can find them on the app as well. If you happen to have any questions during the series, which most of us will have questions, you can find some answers for those on the website, or you can email us about those as well. As we approach Commitment Sunday, which is Sunday, October 28th, be sure to especially take a look at pages 54 through 57 of the field guide. They will give you some very practical tools and tips for how to pray and think about your commitment as Commitment Sunday is approaching. And we also wanted to make you aware of Advanced Commitment Night, which is Wednesday, October 17th. So make sure you know of that date as well. We are launching into week 4, and our topic this week is Momentum's model. And the model is sacrifice. When Jesus told his disciples that the church would be a force that the gates of hell would not be able to withstand, he was describing a church that had momentum. Week 4 of Momentum paints a picture of kingdom-minded investors. Jesus modeled generosity, and those in the first century church also followed his example. This week we'll seek to understand and to imitate the early church who practiced gospel generosity with one another, especially the Christians in Macedonia. Now, as we think about gospel generosity that includes sacrifice, I want to be clear that we need to think about this with last week's discussion in mind, where we talked about our motive for generosity. Generous giving of our time, talent, and treasure will cost us something, and that's why it is sacrificial. And we usually think of sacrifice as something painful and often something burdensome. But if we remember last week's study about the gospel and how it changes our minds and our hearts to see how much greater God's kingdom is than the things of this world, it can motivate us to give sacrificially and generously, but out of a spirit of joy. So, as we dig into sacrificial generosity, remember last week's study about our motive and continue to ask the Lord to show you how God and his kingdom are our highest treasure. Now, before jumping into this week's study, take a look at this video and this story about someone in our church who has been growing in this area as the Lord has brought them through.
So when we first started coming to Grace about 8 years ago, the sermon that first day was called Monument versus Movement. And I think what caught our attention the most about it was just that this was a church who had a picture of what they wanted to do. And they didn't want to just be static and have people come to them, but they were really looking at how do we go out? How do we make a difference in our neighborhood and, of course, across the world? When I came on staff, it was February of 2013. And that year they were talking about, we're going to plant a church in Iowa City this year. Totally foreign to me. I'd never planted a church, never been part of one planting, and then I was being invited into the process to help with music and sound equipment and all of, coming into a small outside leadership role in that. But just realizing then that, this is a group of people that's moving not that far away from our main campus, but really looking to intentionally take the gospel to a certain group of people. About a month after that campus planted, we added a service here in North Liberty because people continue to come here. And seeing God then spring 2 more church plants out of Grace Community in the last 2 years, it's just been cool to see people come, get equipped, get fed, get filled up, and going and taking that message to wherever they live and what that looks like. We've been talking as a family, and we're excited to move our lives to a new town, a new place, south of Iowa City, gathering people around us that are like-minded in the vision, like-minded in wanting to reach their own community. With the church being on the move, it keeps me constantly rehearsing the gospel to myself, to refresh myself on the mission. Why do we do what we do? Well, it's because we have news to share. Well, news is meant to be spread. So I love being part of a church that has that as a focus, that even if the mission is just next door, if you're spreading the news to your neighbor, or even here in this congregation, in my role as music director, you're singing the gospel to the person standing next to you, right? So it's missional even here in this room. I'm excited to have my family be part of that, where we're going to plant this new church. There's a lot of people who are going to hear the gospel that wouldn't have otherwise if Grace had stayed a monument and not been looking to be a movement. Generosity is something that I've been around my whole life. Ever since I was little, as young as I can remember, my parents had people in and out of our home. And when Jody and I got married and had our own place, within 2 weeks after our wedding, we had our house open and people in our living room for Bible studies, for meals, for whatever. We're building it into our own children now, that we're generous with all of our lives. And what I want to pass on to them is not a number in terms of generosity, but a trust in God. And there were a lot of times as a young married couple that, we certainly felt like we didn't have the money to give. We didn't have the 10%, we didn't have the tithe. But we knew that God's faithful, and there were times we would come home from church and find cash on our countertop because we'd been faithful to give what we didn't have, and God provided in return. So we've seen God be generous to us, and our generosity has continued now. It's just something that we really love to do because we know God provides. So it's a way to trust Him.